The Mystery of Sense Perception by J. van der Leeuw, read by Dave Marsland of Cardiff Theosophical Society. This piece is an extract from The Fire of Creation by J. van der Leeuw, published in 1925. What we call sense perception has always been a mystery. We can read as many books on the subject as we like, but we shall never find a really satisfactory explanation of how we perceive things. We are told that in what we call sight, certain vibrations of the ether are focused through the lens of our eye, react on the retina behind the eyeball, and cause a chemical change in the little knobs of which that retina consists. After that, we can trace a movement along the optical nerve to the brain centre which is related to the faculty of sight, and there again a chemical change takes place. That is the last thing we can scientifically trace of the material part of our sense perception, and then suddenly we, the conscious individual, see the green tree or the blue sky. Now it is evident that between this last physical manifestation, the chemical change taking place in the brain, and our consciousness, there is a gap, and that gap cannot be bridged. It does not help us in the least to trace the sense perception a few planes higher and describe the changes taking place in the astral or mental body when we see. The end is always a change in the matter of one of our bodies, and then suddenly in the world of our consciousness there arises that perception of the green tree. How does that image of the tree arise in our consciousness? That is a great problem which philosophy and science do not solve in a satisfactory way. Certainly, science recognises that we are only conscious of that which exists as an image in our consciousness. It recognises that in the last instance we do not know what is the real nature of the object outside us from which the vibration reaches our eye. And it also recognises that the image produced in our consciousness is superimposed by us on that mysterious unknown object from which the vibration came, and that we take that image to be the original and unknown object itself. But what is not and cannot be explained for us is how the vibratory changes resulting in our body are transformed into the image arising in our consciousness, and science will never explain this until it comes to realise that it approaches the solution of this problem in the wrong way. Now, where does the theory of sense perception go wrong? Science begins to assume, and quite rightly so, that the world around us, which we perceive by the senses, is an unknown quantity. And it goes one step further and says that all we know of it is that the certain vibrations of different kinds reach our senses and undergo transformations, ending in those centres of the brain matter which correspond to our various senses. After having come so far, it finds it impossible to bridge the gap between that last physical change and the image arising in our consciousness, and wonders why it cannot solve the problem. But it would be much more marvellous if it could, for it has begun to assume a duality where there is none. It is quite right to say that the universe surrounding us is an unknown quantity, but why should we single out certain parts of that universe as not unknown quantities, but as perfectly well known to us? Why say that we do not know the objects which we perceive by the senses, but that we do know that vibration reaches us, is transmitted through the senses, and affects certain brain centres? With regard to the problem we are considering, the vibrations reaching the centres from objects, the centres themselves, the brain, the entire body, and all that belongs to it are as much an unknown quantity as those objects in the world around us which we perceive by the aid of those senses. And we have no right whatsoever to single out one group of unknown quantities, assume them to be real and known, and with them to test the remainder. How do we know that we have a brain? How do we know that we have senses? How do we know what they are like? How do we know that there are such things as vibrations. How do we know anything about chemical changes taking place? By seeing them, by touching them, by watching them through instruments devised for the purpose. That is to say, we assume vibrations, sensors, brain and body to be real because we perceive them by those same vibrations, sensors, brain and body, or putting it more clearly, we test the reality of those parts of our universe by themselves. If we are to be scientifically exact and philosophically correct, we must place all objects or creatures which we suppose to exist in the world surrounding us in exactly the same class, whether they be trees or stones, or whether they be our own senses, our body, or the vibrations we can trace as coming from different objects and reaching those sensors. With regard to all of them without exception, that holds good which we found to be true with regard to the tree or any other object in the outer world. The thing itself is an unknown quantity to us, and all we know is the image produced by it in the world of our consciousness. All then that we can say with regard to the world we see around us, or rather to the world we think we see around us, is this: that there is a world of the real, the world as it exists in the divine mind, the world as it is thought by God. That is the only existing world, and there is no other world than that. Everything that ever was, or is, or shall be, exists in that world of the real. We are there, the real we. The room in which I sit is there. The paper I hold in my hand exists there. The eye with which I think, I see the paper is there, and so on. All that appears to me in my universe is there in the world of the real. Not spatially separate, but all existing in the unity of the divine mind, and interacting one thing on the other. When the reality of the divine world which I call myself undergoes the influence of other realities, as it incessantly does, the result is that in the sphere of my consciousness certain images are produced corresponding to those realities in the world of the divine mind, and certain events take place corresponding to the interactions taking place in the world of the real. Thus, in the world of my consciousness, a faithful projection takes place of the things which are interacting in the world of the real. But the image in my consciousness, my world, is my production, my creation, a shadow thrown on the screen of my consciousness by the realities within. The images in my consciousness, which I call the world surrounding me, are thus in reality nothing else but the projection or externalization of the world of the real, which is the only world that truly is. Now all this is simple enough and does not offer any serious problems, but the trouble begins when we dissociate the image produced in our consciousness from the consciousness in which it is produced. When we, as it were, take our own creations, the images in our consciousness as things existing in themselves and quite apart from us, and then begin to wonder how we are aware of them, how we perceive that world there opposite us. Of course, we can never find the answer because we have begun to ask the question from an entirely erroneous standpoint. The reason why the gap between the last chemical change in the brain and the image of the green tree arising in our consciousness can never be bridged is that there is no such gap. There is not a material world entirely apart from our consciousness, which in some mysterious way produces in our consciousness those images which we call the world. What we call the vibrations reaching us from the objects, the changes, chemical or motor changes, taking place in the physical organism, are images projected in our consciousness by the interaction of the things in themselves in the world of the real. They are relatively real insofar as there is an actual correspondence between the phenomenon which appears in the world of our consciousness and that reality which reacts on our consciousness and produces the image therein. And we are quite safe in accepting as real the conclusions of physical science, its laws and teachings, and our own daily experiences in what we call our physical world. Only we should constantly bear in mind that they are only relatively real. That is to say, they are real for and in our consciousness, insofar as they are images or awareness produced in that consciousness by the action upon that consciousness of the things in themselves as they are in the world of the real.